Okay, I'm gonna get started. Um, all right, so welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Just to give you a roadmap of the presentation, it's going to be about 35 minutes long, and then we'll have time for questions at the end, at which point you can just come on the mic or you can drop it in the chat, or feel free to drop me questions throughout their presentation if things come up, and then I'll answer them at the end. All right, so a quick intro about me. My name is Insia. I went to NYU, graduated in 2016. I studied economics and psychology, and then I went to Loyola Marymount and got my master's in urban education, while teaching middle school math for a couple of years with Teach for America in Compton, California. I loved being a teacher and I thought I wanted to be a principal at one point, which is why I got my master's. And then I pivoted to Wall Street. I wanted to take advantage of my undergraduate degree and naively thought I would feel a sense of fulfillment the same way that I felt in the classroom. Then the pandemic happened and I got a chance to think about what I wanted to really do. I loved the advocacy work that I did as a teacher. I was on the disciplinary review board. I gutted our discipline matrix system. And so my thought process was to take advantage of the time during the pandemic and study for the LSAT. And if I scored high enough and could get a scholarship, I would go, because that would financially justify me leaving my lucrative job at the time. So I scored a 173. My GPA for undergrad was 3.7. I already discussed what made me, I guess, an untraditional student. I took 5 years off. A lot of my classmates at Berkeley are KJDs, is what Reddit calls it. So people who haven't taken any time off after college. And then my fun fact is I am a DJ. I DJ all around New York City, and I just started getting into the Bay Area scene. Okay, so let's get started. A quick intro about what the LSAT is. It's a legal reasoning test, and it is a skills-based test, which means that it's not going to test your ability to learn a ton of information and regurgitate it in the same way that you might learn information in a college lecture classroom, and then you have to write an exam about all the facts that you've learned. It's all about drilling down on a bunch of skills. The test is, you can take it in person or you can take it online. And then an overview of what the test actually is comprised of. It's 4 sections. So you have, I'm going to start with the reading comprehension section. It's really similar, if you've ever taken the SAT, to the critical reading portion, where you get 4 longish passages and then you have to answer a ton of questions. Then you have analytical reasoning, which is also referred to as logic games. And they're sort of like Sudoku-like puzzles where you have to figure out the sequence of swimmers to lanes, or figure out where to place certain objects or which groups to place certain objects in. And you get 4 of those games. And then you have logical reasoning. So this is probably unlike anything you've seen before. You get 24 to 26 short stimuli, which is going to be like a set of facts or like an argument. And you could be asked to do any one of the following. Like you might have to identify what the main conclusion is, or strengthen the argument, or weaken the argument, or figure out what is wrong with the argument. So those are the 3 main sections that you are going to be scored on. And then you get a 4th section that is the experimental section. And they're obviously not going to tell you which one is experimental and which one is actually graded. So when you take the test, you have to give it your all for each and every section. You also get a writing unscored section, which you can take at the same time that you take the test, or you could take it at a different time. but this is unscored. So that's not something you should stress about whatsoever. You get 35 minutes per section, and that is high level what the LSAT is made of. Okay, so a deeper dive into all three sections. So logical reasoning, as I just mentioned, you get short passages, you are identifying what assumptions are, what the flaw is, and doing sort of a descriptive analysis of those sets of arguments or facts. Logic games is a lot of formal logic, and it's about making a ton of inferences. So you'll get a set of rules, and then you basically have to squish those rules together to conclude more rules and then answer a ton of questions about them. This one is kind of tough when you first start out because you don't really know what you're doing. And once you learn how to diagram properly, this is the section that can get really fun because it's a lot of the same structures that you're going to see over and over again. So it's the most improvable section. Reading comprehension, this one is harder to improve, mostly because reading is something all of you have been doing for your entire lives, and you know how to read, and there's a certain way that you internalize certain parts of the passage, but there are still formulas that you can use to answer the questions that correspond to the reading comprehension passages. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about why schools care about the LSAT. They market it saying that they care about it because it shows that you can think like a lawyer and that it's relatively predictive of 1L grades together with your GPA. It also affects their school rankings, which is, I think, the real reason why they care about the LSAT. So 5% of their rankings are student influence, which means that the median LSAT that their student body gets contributes to 5% of their rankings. And it is, I know that's like a small number, but it is by far the biggest student influence factor. Also, this translates to actual money that they get because the higher their rankings are, the more prestigious the school is, the more alumni donations they get, the better student outcomes they have. So they really, really care about what their rankings are. If any of you, and I'm sure many of you did keep up with it, but there was some chaos with the rankings with the SCOTUS decisions and affirmative action, and Yale and Harvard pulling out, and then a bunch of other schools pulling out of the rankings. But historically, rankings have and probably will continue to matter, but to be decided how it plays out in the future. And why should you care about the LSAT? Arguably, it is the most important part of your application, and also because schools care about the LSAT, so you should care about the LSAT. The way that LSAT scores work is every law school will publish their median LSAT score, their 25th and their 75th percentile LSAT scores. I'm going to show you an example of that on the next slide. But just to preview, if you are at the 25th percent or below their 25th, if your LSAT is 25th percentile or below, then you have to make up for it with something like your grades, extracurriculars, or essays. So that would be a school that might be a reach school. If you are in the median, so 25th to 75th percentile, you are right in the range of what that school is looking for, and a good application should push you in. If you're at and this is what like a target school would be. If you're at the 75th percentile or above, that is a school that you have a very high likelihood of getting admitted to, plus getting a scholarship. So this is super important, and most people don't know about this and don't think about this, but scholarships will flow in if you're at the 75th percentile or above for a particular law school. So you can actually go to law school for cheap or for free. And I'm going to paint you the anecdote, my personal anecdote of LSAT scores and negotiations. But before I do that, let me show you an example of 25th median and 75th percentile LSAT scores. So I want to start with saying that you can get paid $1,000 an hour to study for the LSAT, which sounds wild, but if you think about how much scholarships are worth, they could be worth $250,000, and even more so when you consider lack of debt and interest. And if you study for 250 hours, that's like, and you get a $250,000 scholarship, that's basically getting $1,000 per hour to have studied for the LSAT. Okay, so let me come back to the example. What I have here is different schools, their ranks. So Stanford is ranked number 1, NYU is ranked 5th, WashU is 20th, and Baylor is 49th. And starting from left to right, it's the 25th percentile, median, and 75th percentile. I didn't know this until I started looking up what these numbers meant, but the way that you think about it is if you're in the 75th percentile of like Stanford's range, for example, so if you get a 176 or above, that means that 75% of the student body did not get a 176 or above, which puts you, therefore, in the top 25% of Stanford's class. So that means the higher that you are on this scale from 25, 50 to 75, the higher likelihood that you have in getting admitted to that school. Okay, so say, for example, you score a 173, 174 LSAT score. That would make you competitive at a Harvard, Yale, or Stanford, which are the top few law schools, and you would likely get a small scholarship at NYU, Columbia, Northwestern, Berkeley. With a 173 or 174, if WashU wants you, and they really do because they need high scores to boost their medians and rankings, they have to offer you some incentives, which is where scholarships come in. So in a class of 200 people, 1 or 2 high scorers can make a massive difference for these schools. Then we have the Baylor example to show that like this is true no matter where you score. We've had students who have scored a 154 get massive scholarships and have gone to school for free. But my point with the slide is that the higher you score, the more money you get, and the more higher ranked schools you can get admitted to. But the takeaway should be that anybody can go to law school for cheap or for free with a decent LSAT score, and can get paid $1,000 an hour per hour to have studied for the LSAT. So I am gonna briefly talk about my experience with universities. So I scored a 173 and I took the LSAT during the pandemic when everything was chaos. Schools didn't know what they were doing. A lot of schools over enrolled. And in my defense, I like to think that it was a very competitive year. But with a 173, Fordham Law School, which is ranked somewhere like around number 20, I was like way above their 75th percentile. And they gave me a full ride to come to their law school. And so I took that scholarship and I went to Georgetown and Cornell, who are ranked higher than Fordham. And both of those schools had already admitted me. And I was like, thank you for the admission. However, Fordham's giving me a full ride. Can you give me any money? And so they matched that offer, because even at Cornell and Georgetown, I was way above their 75th percentile. And the incentive they offered me to come was a full scholarship. Then I took those scholarships and I went to the next highest ranked school, which was Berkeley. And I was also above Berkeley's 75th percentile. And I asked Berkeley to match Georgetown, Cornell, and Fordham's offer, and Berkeley matched it. Then I went to like my last school that I really wanted to go to. I wanted to really go to UPenn, and I asked them to match all the offers that I had gotten. And I think I was right at their 75th percentile, or I may have been like a point over. But again, like 2020 was uniquely competitive, I think, because of the pandemic. And I remember I spoke to the financial aid dean at Penn, and I called him and I was like, what can you do? And the first thing he asked me was what my LSAT score was. And when I told him it was a 173, he was like, okay, cool, we can definitely work with you. Let me give you a call back. But unfortunately, at that point, all their money, their scholarship money had dried up. So I'm at Berkeley. Um, and that should be like an example of schools are really willing to negotiate, even if they don't give you money up front. Ask for it. They usually will have it and are down to give it to you, and use this opportunity to negotiate with law schools. Okay. How long should you study for? The thing I want to emphasize here is longer than you think. Most important thing is to start planning ahead, because law schools are rolling admissions, which means that they start reviewing applications as they roll in. So they don't like, it's not like they open in October, but they won't start reviewing till December. They're going to review as they come in. So you have a higher likelihood of getting into a school and competing for fewer spots when admissions is much more positive and excited to read essays. There is no number of weeks or months, so you don't have to think about it like that. But Apollo's wisdom is that the whole like take a 3-month course, that is wrong. Thankfully, the LSAT doesn't take, the Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule. It doesn't take that 10,000 hours, but it does take about 250 to 300 hours. So if you break that down, if you're studying full time, that's about 3 to 4 months. If you're studying about 15 to 20 hours, that's about half a year. If you're studying 5 to 10 hours, that's about a year. So I would start planning at least a year before you actually want to apply, because it is a long process, and if you have the luxury of time, you should use it. I also want to mention, if you apply earlier, so like by Thanksgiving, you have about a 10 to 15% boost. The caveat, however, is that it is better to apply later with a higher LSAT score than earlier with a worse one. So to avoid this dilemma altogether, just take the LSAT early. I studied 15 to 20 hours a week for 6 months. And so I started in January 2020, and I took the LSAT in June of 2020. And then I started writing my applications in July. And I was done with submitting all of my applications the first week of November. So it's a good idea if you're looking to apply for next year. It's a good idea to start studying start thinking about studying like starting January. I also was working full time, which was really rough. I was working on Wall Street, where I had to get to the trading desk by 7 a.m. Like if I was there at 7, I was late. And I would work from 7 to 5:30, and then I'd have a 30-minute break. And then from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., I studied 5 days a week for 6 months, and it was brutal. So the takeaway from that should be, if you have the luxury of time, and I would presume that if you're in college, you have a little bit more time than you would if you're working full time, to take advantage of it, of the time. Okay. The second most common question is how to study. I'm going to start with the leftmost bucket, which is self-studying. That means just like buying some books online, having an online course, and going through it on your own. It is great for students who have a lot of discipline. And it's obviously the least expensive and it's the most flexible. You can do it on your own. On the other hand, it can be really hard to stay organized and motivated. And it's hard to be responsible, not just for studying, but to figure out how you want to study, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and making sure that you're doing it right. Because the last thing that you want to do is learn something the wrong way and then reinforce that negative pattern of doing things. Apollo does have a self-study online course. And there's also a ton of other courses too, like Seven Sage has one. I think there's this thing called the LSAT Devil, Khan Academy. So there's a lot of self-study tools online. I'm gonna go all the way to the right and talk about the live course. And Apollo strongly advises against this for most people because, like I mentioned, LSAT is not like college course where you can just sit in a lecture hall and listen to somebody else talk about how they did a test. That's not going to help you do this test, because it's very skills based and practice based. One exception is if you really struggle with organization and you just need to be forced to be locked in a room for like 5 hours a week, this might be okay, but it also is the most expensive option. So no real reason to do it. I'm going to move to the middle option, which is coaching, and it solves for the major negatives of the other options. So very analogous to a music, like learning a musical skill. It's like learning, there are a few basic skills and things that you need to learn, like what are the scales, what are the chords, what's the proper technique, but then your objective is to go out there, practice the instrument, and sitting and listening to somebody else play the instrument isn't going to necessarily help you do it. Sometimes you can you can learn by ear and on your own, but most people, especially if you have limited time to get ready for a gig, you're going to want to hire a teacher. Also, it's not enough to like know how to play the piano, but you have to be able to perform under pressure with thousands of people watching when your career is on the line. And this I mentioned because the LSAT is timed. Like you get 35 minutes per section and you have to perform. Your coach is going to be like your personal trainer. They're putting you through an intense workout, and it combines the flexibility of self-studying so you can book when you want with the guidance of and support of a course. So this is what Apollo's main offering is, because we genuinely believe that it's the best option for most people. And to give you a personal anecdote as to what I did. So I did a live course. And again, it was during the pandemic, which was just a virtual course. And I ended up having one of my friends who did Teacher America with me. So she was a former teacher and she had taken the LSAT and she had scored really high on it. And she offered to basically supplement my learning. So it ended up being exactly like the Apollo coaching package, which is like you get a curriculum and then you get a bunch of videos and lectures and notes and all that stuff. But then you also get somebody who is guiding you and making sure that you're doing the questions the right way. Okay. What if you're not applying for a while? That's fine. It's never too early to start with the fundamentals. It's like riding a bike because it's very skills based. You can also take a deductive logical philosophy class if they have that at your school. I did not take one, but if you do, I think most of them go over formal logic skills, but again, like not needed. You can totally get by without taking a philosophy class. The Apollo LR course is a great place to start for anyone with a long timeline because it's so focused on drills and skill building that you will get a ton of practice from the get-go. You can also, like if you do Sudoku or if you've tried it, like that's a great way to get familiar with analytical reasoning, spatial reasoning. That's going to help with games. Engage in tough reading, like get a subscription to The Economist or The New Yorker and force yourself to read for 35 minutes dense language and passages that you're not necessarily interested in or are riveting to you. That's going to help a lot too, because reading comp is very dense and can be very dense. The next question is like the retake question. So you should take the test until you get the score you want because your highest score is the one that matters. Um, I took the test twice and I won't even mention my first score because it was like so much significantly, like it was significantly lower than the 173. And I had barely studied for it and I knew that my practice tests were really, really low, but I thought I would turn out to be a secret genius, like when I took the LSAT on the real day, and I didn't. So, um, bottom line is, if you have room to improve, take it again. They only care about your highest score because when I applied to law schools with both of my scores, like there's no way that the schools that accepted me looked at my first score because it was like just so much lower than my most recent one. Your score is good for 5 years, and this is more important than it seems because if you're going to apply within first 5 years, you should take the test early. And it's, like I said, much easier to study while in school than while you're working. Much better to get it out of the way. Like this is not something that you want necessarily hanging over your head, and then you can get on with your gap year. Most important thing is to start early, take advantage of time. Also, I took 5 years off after college. I worked, and it was definitely really difficult to come back to testing mode and recondition myself in how to study and how to do skills and create a study plan. You guys have the advantage of knowing how to be students and doing student thinking and like all that really well. So this is a great time to get started. Okay. So what should you do now? You should start planning. Figure out um figure out a timeline if you haven't. Decide when you want to apply to law school and build out your LSAT plans from there. The right-hand side is a bunch of dates of upcoming LSATs. And just to note, they don't offer it every single month, but they offer it pretty frequently throughout the year. Once you pick a date, then I would start planning backwards and do research on how you think you want to study, like which one of those three options, self-studying, coaching, or live course speaks to you. And do research because there's like so much out there, so many different options out there. You can also sign up for a free strategy call with an Apollo coach. We can help you sort through all of these decisions and make a good plan about how to move forward with your prep. And I am going to drop the strategy call link in the chat for everybody. Hopefully that worked. Okay. And like I mentioned, start reading complex material. So like I mentioned, like The Economist, Science Daily, any of those like longer passages that you might not find necessarily interesting, sit for 35 minutes without like looking at your phone and see how much you can retain from it. And that'll get you in the zone of like this weird LSAT dense language. Okay. Also, like do self-care stuff. I didn't do that and I was burning out frequently. But you need to be a full person when you take the test. You're training like an athlete, so you need to have you need to make like your mental health, physical health a priority, your social life, like make time to go to the gym, like walk your dog, whatever works for you. It's a holistic process. So, and people often make the mistake of letting the LSAT take over their lives. But as I mentioned, it will lead to burnout. Okay. So this isn't necessarily a sales pitch, but I wanted to give you a sense of what we're all about and what we can do for you if you're interested. There's three main offers that we share with people. One, it's our tutors. Two, it's our curriculum. And then three, it's our results. So all of our tutors have been through this process. The median coach score is 177. A lot of us have been former teachers. I was a former teacher and I love the craft of teaching. Secondly, our curriculum, it focuses on skill building, and that's what sets us apart from other prep companies. So there's no sugarcoating, no BS. You're getting the strong fundamentals and training to unlock your full potential. And we're going to build your skills from the ground up. So whether you have done a little bit of LSAT studying before, or you've never seen LSAT, like you've never seen an LSAT question before, we will tailor the plan based on what your needs are. And then last but not least, our results speak for themselves. We've worked with hundreds of students and anybody can make massive gains on this test. Our students have yielded an average improvement of 16 points, and you can see some of those shining examples here. And then that is all. Thank you for coming. We have this offer for 2 weeks only of up to $300 off of LSAT coaching to members of this organization with the discount code listed. And actually the discount code is SDSUPLS. And it's a great, you can, as I mentioned, you can start with the free strategy call. It's a great place to go over building a timeline and picking a study plan and asking just general questions. And we'll give you feedback on where your prep is at right now. We also do admissions consulting. So application season is right around the corner. And if you're looking to get help with your personal statements or picking out a list of schools or crafting just like a holistic good application, we can help with that. Contact info is below. QR code is there for our Instagram. I'm going to drop my name in the chat and you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or ask me any questions about anything I mentioned about my personal journey. But other than that, I can take questions now. You can drop them in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself. But thank you for coming. And then somebody just asked, what Apollo course did I mention if you aren't taking the LSAT anytime soon? So the self-study course is the Apollo LR course. I'm going to put that in the chat too. LR stands for logical reasoning. Any self-study books you recommend? I don't know if there's any books per se, but I would make sure that whatever book you do get, that the questions that they're printing are official LSAT released questions and not just questions that Princeton Review or Kaplan, the company crafted. Okay. How far in advance would you recommend taking the LSAT prior to applying to law schools? I would say if you're studying 15 to 20 hours a week. So my sample timeline was I started studying in Jan 2020. I took the LSAT in June 2020. So that was about half a year of studying. And then I applied to law schools that October. So what is that? That's 10 months prior to submitting your application, you should start studying for the LSAT if you can study 15 to 20 hours a week. As undergrad, what year would you ideally recommend us to begin studying? That depends. If you want to go to law school right after you graduate, which I highly recommend against. But if you want to do it, I would start studying your second semester of your junior year. So your spring semester of your junior year. Also, I got a question about letters of recommendation. So if you aren't planning to apply right after graduating undergrad, the law school applications, almost all of them want an academic letter of rec. I would try to, whether you are applying right after law school or not, I would get those letters of recs from your professors now when they know you and they know your work. Don't be like me. I waited 5 years after I graduated to ask my NYU professor, and I wrote him this really long email, and he responded saying, so sorry, I've had thousands of students after you. I have no idea who you are. So fortunately for me, I was able to get it from my grad school professor, but an undergrad professor is preferable to a grad school because I don't know, law schools just, they like stuff from your undergrad more. Like your GPA, like they care more about your undergrad GPA than like a grad school GPA. Okay, another question. If I plan to graduate a semester early, so next year, fall 2024, do you recommend beginning to study January and then take the LSAT in the summer? So I'm ready to apply by October. Okay, wait, if I plan, this is like a logic game question. If I plan to graduate a semester early, yes, the timeline would be the same. So yeah, you would, I think that's right. Because you can't matriculate into law school earlier than the fall semester anyway. So yeah, I would keep the same timeline, and then you get like an extra semester to just like chill. Any other questions? These are really great questions. Thanks for asking them. Oh, if you are a student of color, look into SEO law. Wait, let me send this out to everybody. Sorry, if you're a student of color who's also interested in a big law internship or career, look into SEO law. They offer law internships, and they pay a lot of money. They pay like a big law salary to students this summer before they even enter law school. So it's a great way to make connections, get a ton of experience, and like make a ton of money. Okay, another question, out of curiosity, how long of a break do you recommend between undergrad and starting law school? I That's like my own bias. I would say like the students, like my classmates who have had at least a 2 year break and they've like worked in those 2 years, there is like a significant amount of maturity that they have that like students who haven't worked have, and a sense of professionalism too. And I know you are all like, I'm sure, really competitive students and have done a ton of internships and have work experience, but like to work full time at a place for more than a year, you're going to gain skills in ways that you've never experienced. So I would say at least 2 years, but I know everybody has different preferences. That's just my bias. I'll also say that now, having applied to internships while in law school, my colleagues who interned with me over the summer, those who were KJDs, the learning curve was super steep for them versus like people who had come in, like even something as basic as like writing an email and email etiquette and like knowing how quickly to respond, when not to respond, who to CC, like things like that. And that's just like one small thing. You learn that having worked for a couple of years. Okay, do I have any knowledge of law schools outside of the US, such as application process and requirements? I do not. That is a great question, though, and I would be curious myself. But I do know for a lot of international students, they will opt out of the JD program, which is like what most American students do when they go to law school, and they will get their master's in law called the LLM, which is a shorter program. So JD is 3 years, and I think the LLM is anywhere from a year to 2 years. would you recommend doing a master's before going to law school? I wouldn't recommend it just for the sake of doing it for law school, but if you want to do it, there's like you should do the master's because you want to do the master's and for no reason at all. But it's not going to give you a boost in your application for any if that's what you're wondering about. I will say from my personal experience, having done a master's, it did give me some more direction as to what I wanted and didn't want to do, which ultimately led me to choose law school and be confident about it. So that could be another consideration. The next question I got was, would going out of my way to minor in poli-sci, econ psych, or something similar be helpful when applying to law school? When you say helpful, I am assuming that you mean like increasing your chances of getting into law school. For that reason, no, they don't care. For all they care, you could have like majored in basket weaving. They just care about your GPA, as like horrible as that sounds. I will say, like, if you like took organic chemistry and a bunch of like really difficult science subjects or something like that, and you have like a relatively lower GPA, they're going to be sympathetic to that. But like, don't minor or major in something because you want to get into law school. They're ultimately going to care about your GPA. Like, you could have, and sometimes I regret, like, I don't regret it, but if had I known that I was definitely going to go to law school after college, I would have maybe like just majored in psychology because my psychology GPA was like a 3.99. My econ major
You're
brought it.
fucking lying.
Um, okay. Sorry about that. Were there any self-study books that you used and would recommend? Would you recommend the LR Bibles by PowerScore? I did not use any self-study books. I did a bunch of full-length practice tests after I like figured out the fundamentals. And I don't know what the LR Bibles by PowerScore is, but I think like for me, it came down to just like learning the fundamentals. Once I knew what they were, I just literally did a practice test for as many times as I could during the week until I like got the score that I was comfortable with getting consistently. What would you say a good GPA is when applying to law school? That's going to depend on every law school. So like I think like Harvard's median GPA is really high. I think it's like a 3.85 or 3.9. Like it's something wild. But then if you look at like Berkeley's GPA, their median GPA is like a 3.7, which is like a little bit more doable, I think. But a good like this is going to depend on like schools. I think anything above a 3.5, like you should be okay. And then also like you have to like pull levers. So if you're like if you want to go to Berkeley and your score, you got like a 3.2 GPA, then you're gonna need to like get a higher LSAT score to make up for that lower GPA. Also, like these are not hard and fast numbers, but I would from my anecdotal experience, it seems like the LSAT is like 70% of your application and the rest is your GPA. And then a small portion of it is like everything else, like letters of rec and extracurriculars and essays. Obviously, if you have like a crazy life story, and you want to put that in there, that might like boost you. Also, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, but you're gonna have to like see, like ideally you would want to be at or above the median GPA and LSAT score of each of the schools that you are applying to. And that's all like public data. You can like just Google like UC Berkeley median. They have like a report, an academic report for every class. where they will show you everything. Like they'll show you a breakdown by demographics, like how many Asian, white, Black students, how many women versus men versus unidentified people, how many, and then like from that class, like how many students went into public interest versus big law, and like how much money people are making. Like there is so much data that schools are required to publish. So I would encourage you to look at that data to see what you need to score. Oh, what I was going to say. So unlike college admissions where they're looking at your GPA and they like really care about your GPA because it's a 4-year display of all of your hard work, law school is skewed the other way where they care a little bit more about or not a little bit more, I would say significantly more about your LSAT. So if you have a great GPA, wonderful. You also just have to do well on the LSAT. If your GPA is not that great, that's also okay because with a really fantastic LSAT, like you can get yourself into a good law school. So it's like win-win, I think. Any other questions? Thanks. Okay, I'm gonna stick around for a few more minutes, but feel free to ask any more questions. But if not, thank you so much for coming.